start.
A happy good evening to all members, professional colleagues. It's a great pleasure to have the speaker of the day, CA Vinod sir, with us. So today we'll be hearing to the topic on introductory session to AS 18 related party transactions and AS 19 leases. So I thank the chairman of the SARC and the secretary and managing the regional council members for giving me this opportunity to be part of this session. Dear members, as we have a lot of changes since for the accounting standards, we need to consider while preparing the tax audit reports also, and a lot of points to be considered. So here we have a wonderful speaker, Mr. CA Vinod Balachandran sir. CA Vinod Balachandran sir. He has a total of 27 years of experience, 18 years of experience in industry and 9 years in practice. He is an insolvency professional from the year 2019, and he's a fellow chartered accountant and in practice from the year March 2013. He was a CFO of an international family group in India during 2012 to 2013. He was a head of finance, property development, and hospitality at Al Fadan Group in Qatar during 2006 to 2012. He was also a finance head in a private venture capital company in Dubai during 2005 to 2006. He was also a financial controller in Indian Hotels Company Limited, Tata Group, during 1995 to 2005 at Mumbai. He is also faculty on India's committee, IFRS India, at the ICA level, and also ICA faculty for ICA student groups in GMCS and orientation. His additional qualification includes ACIS Chartered Secretary in London. Is a management development program from the IIM Bangalore. Is also an IFRS ACCA certification he has completed during 2007, and he's also a diploma holder in ISA from ICA from 2015. So with these few words, and here we have a wonderful speaker with a lot of experience and a wonderful faculty, the speaker. So it's great to have CA Vinod Balachandran sir here. Sir, pleasure to have you, sir. And
Thank you, sir.
Over to you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Today we'll discuss two accounting standards. One is related party transaction, and the second one is leases. Both are not very complicated, but there has been some minor changes which we should just keep in mind. Also, we should remember that from 2021-22 year, the new classification norms are in process for companies, and from previous year to that, 2021, the revised classification norms for proprietor, partnerships, etc. are there, which are basically called non-companies. So 2021, already 1 year has passed. Non-companies, many of them have complied with the new classification level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4, which is MSME plus large companies. And for private limited companies and LLP, from 21-22 accounting year, the new classification norms are there, and with the relaxation, etc., given in the AS. We should remember two criteria. That 250 crore is the criteria between small and medium MSME, and about 250 crore turnover is basically large companies. And Ind AS says that 250 crore net worth, if you are there, you have to follow Ind AS. And all listed companies have to follow Ind AS. So this 250 crore, there are now two limits. 250 crore turnover, if you are exceeding, you have to follow all the accounting standards. There are no exceptions. And if you exceed 250 crore net worth in companies, etc., then you have to follow Ind AS. All listed companies have to mandatory follow Ind AS. So this is just some basic things we have to keep in mind. Today our session is on non-companies, which is basically proprietor and partnerships, etc., where 4 classification norms are there, level 1 to 4. Level 4 is normally called the micro level, which is less than 10 crore turnover, where there are a lot of exceptions, and you can just prepare some basic accounts. Then you have small, medium, and large. So the AS is now a bit confusing because there are 4 levels of AS for partnership, proprietorship, etc. That is, anybody in the who is doing business, anything commercial in nature, have to follow these AS. As regards purely charitable trusts or societies, etc., technically there is no accounting standard technically, because they are not of commercial nature, but it is better to follow the accounting standards even for those companies. So we are focusing today on non-corporates, non-companies, partnership, proprietor, etc., which is basically the maximum number in India. And when we are doing partnership and proprietor accounts, what we need to keep in mind is first to find out turnover and borrowing criteria, based on which it will be decided whether we are level 1, level 2, level 3, or level 4. So very important. And whichever level we are in the notes to accounts, we need to write, I am at this level. And because I'm in level 3, for example, write in the notes. It's very, very important. So the reader of the account should know what level is this company and what are the accounting policies followed for this classification. So this is something which you have to just keep in mind. Just to again refresh your memory, these are the turnover and borrowing criteria. Largely easier to keep the turnover criteria in mind. So this will give you a broad view of the 4 levels of proprietor, partnerships, etc. Companies and LLP have a separate classification called SME, small and medium company. That's a different story altogether. That is for private limited company and LLP. You don't follow this classification. You have a separate classification. So just keep it in mind. You can have a look at it just to keep on refreshing our memory. So this year, whenever you are preparing these partnership proprietor account, make sure that in the notes you write what level it is and what are the policies you will follow or not follow. If you look at this, there are 8 accounting policies which are mandatory for all levels. So this is the easiest way to find out. If you look at it, both the accounting policies we are doing today, which is related party transaction and leases, both do not come under this. That means for both those items, there are certain exemptions given. We need to start remembering what are those exemptions. It is not necessary that you follow these exemptions. You can follow the full thing, nobody stops you. But you have to write it down that you're not following the exceptions and you're following all the accounting policies. First, what we are going to do is accounting standard 18, which is called the related party transaction. Now, the best part about accounting standard 18 is that this transaction is not applicable for level 3 and 4. One second. If you look at it, for level 3 and 4, for level 3 and 4 companies, you don't need to follow related party transaction disclosures. So this standard is purely a disclosure standard. So you can avoid disclosures if you are in level 3 and 4. That means up to 50 crore turnover. Technically, for proprietor partnership, you don't need to disclose related party. But you must remember that when you are preparing tax audit, etc., you are not only preparing from the accounting standard point of view, you are also preparing information for income tax department, GST department, etc. Hence, it is always advisable that even though level 3 and 4 is exempted from disclosure, it is always advised that you do not follow that exemption and you actually disclose, because for income tax also there are, in the tax audit, there are related party transaction, purchases from related party, expenditure to related party. So it's always better that you report this even though you have exemption. Even in GST, related party transactions, billing, the valuation, etc. are very important. So if anybody refers to your audited accounts, it is very important that you disclose related parties transaction, even if you are in level 3 and 4. At least go for the basic disclosure so that the revenue departments know very clearly that you are relying on certain data and you have disclosed those data. So hence the purpose of excluding related party from the smaller 3 and 4, we understand less than 10 crore turnover and minor borrowing could be small companies, not very material, but the next level, micro, and the small level is, micro level is less than 10 crore, but the small level is slightly bigger, up to 50 crore and all that. So it is better, I would suggest that you disclose related party transaction, even though you have exemption under the accounting standard. So you can write it in the notes that if you are in level 3 or 4, you can write it that it is exempted, but you are not following the exemption, you are disclosing the data. This is my suggestion, not a clear thing, not a requirement. Now we will, what are related parties? Definitions are clear. You should have control or significant influence on the other. That is related party. As you are aware, what is a related party under Income Tax Act, under the Accounting Standard, and under the Companies Act? All three have different definitions of related party. So you have to be careful when you are preparing the accounts, because depending upon who is the reader, their impressions of related party will be different. So when in the audited accounts, we are always preparing what is given under the accounting standard. So anybody who has control or significant influence is a related party. So control means 50%, voting power, like subsidiary holding subsidiary. So I control more than 50%. That means I can take decisions myself. Or a substantial interest, more than 20% interest in the group shareholding. This is called control. That is, I can, it's like, you are like almost, you are an associate plus 20% plus shareholding. You control the voting power. You control the composition of the board of directors. That is, you can appoint or remove somebody from the board, etc. It's called control. Significant influence basically means you can participate in the policy decisions. You don't need to control, but you can participate in the financial or operating policy decisions. So who is a related party? A person who can control or have significant influence. Another term we need to find out is relative, because in proprietor partnership, mostly individual husband, wife are all related. There'll be sister-in-law, father-in-law, mother-in-law. So in all the three definitions, sometimes certain people are excluded. So a relative under the standard is basically direct family chart, spouse, son, daughter, brother, sister, father, mother. So the in-laws, you have to see whether they come into this picture or not. Because under the definition of income tax is wider. In income tax, so many people come into the definition of related party, while in AS, it's not that expensive. So you have to study the definition differences to see whether anybody comes under the relation or no. And the new term here is called KMP, key management personnel, that is directors or officers like CFO, CEO, general manager. In many companies, there will be one or two staff who are the most important, who takes all the decisions. So now they are called KMP, meaning they have responsibility for planning and controlling, etc. So they are KMP. So KMPs are also related party. So these are just basic definition to keep in mind. Control and significant influence are the key. This chart gives you conceptual clarity of what kinds of controls are allowed under related party. You can directly control a company. You can indirectly control a company, or you can control a company through intermediary. Through another company, you control the third company. If you look at these charts, these are clear. The first chart on the left side is direct control. H owns SH, SH owns S. So, control goes directly. The second middle one is indirect control. I own directly certain shares in a company, and my sister company also owns shares in this company. So in totality, I am controlling. The third one are co-subsidiaries. Sometimes you have a subsidiary, then through the subsidiary, you are owning some other company. And then you are controlling the subsidiary through another company also. So that is the chart on the right side. So as per the definition, direct, indirectly, or through intermediary, you can control companies, and it will all fall under the control definition or significant influence definition.
Sir, was there an
Yeah.
issue?
Yeah.
So you're looking for any, because you're,
Are you able to see the slides?
yeah, we are able to see the slides.
Okay. I just waiting for you to read the slide. That is.
Oh, okay. So you can see the response or something, questions in the,
Yeah.
I have made you organizer also, so you can see the
Yeah,
queries.
I could see. Yeah, I can see queries have come. Anything? I can't see anything.
In questions, if you expand it, you can see there is one question. No, there is not query actually. So, there is one query on LLP. Can you see that, sir? 620 we have got.
Yeah, thanks for your clarification on non-company issues. LLP to be treated, one second, with ICAI. Why I'm just trying to read that. One second.
No, you can expand it as we say.
Please clarify LLP to be treated as non-company. See, LLP technically, this is a query was whether LLP is a company or a non-company. LLP is a body corporate. So 100% LLP is a company, and it will come under the SMC definition, small and medium company. It will not come under this non-company what we are discussing now, level 1, 2, 3, 4. What we are discussing now will basically only include partnership and proprietorship, largely. The other set of relaxation are for SMC, small and medium enterprises, or small and medium company, as we call it. That is for private limited company and LLP. Because the definition of limited liability partnership is that it's a body corporate. So this is the clarification. I have not seen a direct clarification from ICAI yet on this, but conceptually, my understanding is that since it is a body corporate, and we are filing the returns through MCA, etc., and we cannot do presumptive taxation, etc., for LLP. That means definitely it is the status of a company as regards following accounting standards. This is the clarification. Any further queries, please put it on the chat so I can see it. I'm just getting used to this one. So if you see, first definition is direct, indirectly you can control. The second definition is a bit more complex. The second definition, joint venture companies. So under the accounting standards, joint venturers, because in a joint venture company, normally there will be one or two people. So between the joint venturers, there is no relation, is what the accounting standards say. So in this case, the joint venture company is a related party, but the owners of the joint venture company, who owns the joint venture company, preferably there will be one or two individuals, they are not related party. But now if you go under the Ind AS, joint venture partners are also related under Ind AS because the expansion there is a bit more large. So in large JV companies, etc., we have to be very careful that in under Ind AS, the joint venturers you must include as a related party. But while under the AS, they are not a relation. Only the JV company is a relation. The owners of the JV are not related. That is the logic in the accounting standard. Now, individuals, since we are mostly dealing with individuals and partnerships, you will see in family many individuals own a company. Some have plus 50%, some have only 20%, significant influence, some have control. So all the relations are also related parties. So if I am having control of 50% of a company, my father, mother, brother, sister, they are all related parties. That's what it says. Direct relation. Under accounting standard, only direct relations are related party. While under the income tax, even indirect in-laws and all could come under the definition. So in partnership proprietor, be careful. If the husband is a relative, husband owns 50%, then transactions with wife, please disclose as a related party. This is basically a disclosure standard. So there's no accounting involved. Now, this is the slide where a lot of people have confusion. Key management
Are you able to hear us?
Yeah, no, I can't hear you.
sir. Are we audible?
You're able to see, no?
Yeah, I can see, but as of I can see a browser page. Navigate to the
One second. Let me just open this one, the presentation. Just give me 1 minute. I'm just opening the presentation. I'm
Okay.
sorry, everything just shut down. I don't know
Yes.
why.
Understood, sir. No problem, sir.
Yeah, just now. I'm
Now
just
the
opening
answer
the
is-
presentation. Yeah, something I don't know. Just opening.
Yes, sir. So,
We lost only 5 minutes, no?
yes, sir. That is what you said. That this is the slide where,
Yeah,
where
correct,
most
correct,
of the confusion. That is where.
correct. So I'm
This
just
slide.
putting.
This
You're
slide
able
only.
to
This
see.
slide.
You're
Yeah, I
able to
can
see.
see. I can see,
Okay.
but it to be moved. Now I can see.
Yeah. Now you can move it.
Yeah. Starts.
Okay. Can I start or?
Start, please.
Okay. Sorry, I'm back from the break. My computer just hung up on me. Sorry about it. So we were discussing this slide, which is a related party transaction, where non-executive directors are not KMP as per the revised accounting standards. While if you go by the Ind AS, the non-executive directors are actually KMP. Now, in many companies, we assume that whole-time director, managing directors are all KMP. But if they are not involved in planning or directing, you can ignore them from the related party. Because in many cases, they don't do anything. Maybe they are just sleeping, or they are just not in India, or just for the namesake, they are MD. So this is a slide which you have to just keep in mind. One more relationship of related party is that for individuals and KMPs, if they are a KMP of one company, the related companies also comes under related party. Normally you will have maybe I am a key management person in company A. So the other companies which A controls also, I can technically say that I am also running all those companies. Same thing for individuals. Maybe the father is the director of one company, that company owns another company. So in that second company also, the father can be assumed to be a KMP because he controls the main company. So this is basically the definitions of a KMP. Individuals and companies through various shareholdings you can get as a KMP. In addition to individual shareholding and company shareholding, managers who actually take up a lot of positioning, even though they are not owner, a long-time manager or the person who actually takes all the decision, he can also be related party. So to sum up, three types of people can be related party: individual owners, key management people, and companies which control other companies through various shareholdings. Another area where general confusions happen is that just because I'm a director in both the companies does not mean that I am a related party. Because in many prior partnership companies or in small and medium companies, because accounting standard is for SMC also, that this is from company perspective, there will be a director, common director. The husband and wife are common directors in all the companies. Just because they are common directors doesn't mean that they are related party. They have to be doing something, planning, directing, coordinating. However, if they are designated as a KMP, then all the companies become related. So generally it happens that, common director is generally put in all the account statements as related parties. You have to check whether they are actively involved or not. Sometimes we are confused. Maybe I have only one customer which controls my company. 100% he buys all my stuff. We show him to be related. They are not related at all. Economic dependence is not a related party. Then trade union, bank nominees, government nominees. Now, these are not related parties. They are just there to protect their shareholding. That's all. So these kinds of supervisory people in the board, etc., do not come under the term related parties. These are all common mistakes we see, that even nominee directors we put as related party. They've got nothing to do with the running of the company. One exemption is given. In some cases, there is a confidentiality clauses attached, saying that you're not supposed to reveal. Now that's a bit tricky because under law we are supposed to tell, but confidentiality says that I'm not supposed to reveal. So you have to write in the notes technically that for a particular related party, this confidentiality clause is there, and hence no name is mentioned. Because sometimes from the tax authorities perspective, they can always say that, why you did not disclose. So you have to be careful here. You can have general disclosures saying that there are one or two parties who have confidentiality agreements, and name is not mentioned. You can just put it in a block, others or something like that, no names. How much to disclose? Generally, the 10% rule is taken. If you exceed 10% of total related party transaction of a particular kind, disclose. What the tax authorities want is other than business transactions. That is, you make some loan or you give some salary just for the heck of it. So based on nature also, you have to be careful. Are you doing transactions with the related party in the normal course of business or no? If it's not normal course of business, definitely report it. Disclosures, we have discussed before, level 3 and 4 need not follow these disclosures. That is up to 50 crore turnover. You can just ignore this entire standard. But it is always advised not to ignore this standard because this is very important from tax perspective, income tax and GST. They all want to know what are the related party transaction. In the tax audit, you are actually certifying transactions with related parties. It's always better to follow this standard. Don't exempt it. At least do basic disclosures. You are supposed to disclose the names of all the related party, even if there is no transactions with them. That is the first learning. Maybe I have 10 related parties I don't do business with at all, but just write their names. That is important. Not writing their names will not help. And the second paragraph will be, for whatever transactions you are having with them, disclose the transactions. This is a general format, but you can follow your own format as long as you are providing the information. The related party transactions, try to put it in blocks so it's easy to understand: purchases, sales, financing, salary, something like that. So it's easy to understand. Don't put everything in one block and just disclose. Just try to give some basic split ups and try to identify holding companies, subsidiaries. When you give transactions, you can put it in group for all the holding companies, one line. Some companies, they disclose separately each line. I'm always for the fact that better to disclose separately, because from tax perspective, it's always easy, better to give correct information. Yeah, this is just a format. You can follow your own format. There is no format which is prescribed by the standard. It just tells you that try and disclose. Common errors we have found in annual reports, in audited accounts. In many audited accounts, we have seen that the salaries to KMP, that is salary to director, partner, etc., it is reference to the note in the accounts. In the expenses, there will be salary paid to director or salary paid to managing partner, etc. That is not enough. You have to disclose in the notes separately remuneration. So many people make that mistake. So please don't repeat that in case you're doing it. The second one is, many people miss disclosing the names of the related parties because there are no transactions with them. So they just feel that no need to give. That's a bigger mistake. So as an auditor or as a accountant of that company, first we need to find out what are the related parties of that company. For that, that's not easy. You have to look at all the transactions. Wherever you have doubt, ask for the shareholding pattern of those companies. Get a list of relatives signed from all the partners, etc. Then you can do ROC check. In the ROC, you can get data of the companies where you are trading with. On a sample basis, you should do debtors and creditors check to find out that none of these the common people are involved in those companies. You can do to some extent, but maybe you cannot. Some cases will be so well hidden that we'll never come to know. That's why I said it's always better to disclose whatever we know. In many companies we have seen, they just disclose one line, related party transaction. That's not enough. Try to give split up purchases, sales, etc., etc. So it's easier to understand. Another area which is commonly missed is many times loans, etc., are guaranteed by these related parties, and it is generally missed out to disclose. So please make sure that if you have guaranteed any loans, etc., it's always disclosed in the related party transactions as guarantees given, etc. Especially in proprietor and partnerships, personal guarantees are 100% given at all times. Even though personal, so you have to see what are the guarantees given, etc. Guarantees are generally missed out because guarantees are normally disclosed in the initial schedules or in the notes. It's written this loan is taken, this guarantee, but in the related party notes, generally it is not written. People miss it. Many auditors also sign saying that list of related parties is as certified by the management, which is not acceptable by the accounting standard. Don't write that line, even though we have relied on that. Try to do some test checks to prove that at least for some large transaction you have done a test check and these are not related. Leasing. In many times the word lessor lessee is used, but you should write the name of the related party. Difference between Ind AS and accounting standard we have discussed. Ind AS, instead of key management person KMP, they say close member of the family for relatives, not for KMPs, for relatives. Because under AS the relatives are straightforward, father, mother, son, daughter, the straight line relatives, up and down. While in Ind AS, it's a bit more large. They say close member of the families. That means it's what is close is a bit difficult. So I put the definition of what is close. So it's going a bit somewhat like the income tax side, which is a very large, expensive definition. So definition of relative, we have to be very, very careful. Sometimes it's safer to put whomever we know as relative because sometimes we might not know the family tree and the connections. The second biggest difference between Ind AS and AS is that independent directors under the accounting standard, what we are doing now, they are not a related party, but under Ind AS, they are all related because they fall under KMP. So these are the two main differences we need to just keep in mind. Just a simple trick question, just to refresh your memory. If you can just try to do and put it in chat if possible. If you say, if anybody can tell me the answer, just try it. This is indirect holding, whether there is a related party or not. If anybody could try it and put in question answer, it will be interesting at least. A holds B, B holds C, A also holds C. So the question is whether C is a related party or not. To be related, you should have control or significant influence. Control is largely, you know what is control, 50% holding, 50% of the board, composition of the board, more than 20% shareholding. While significant influence is power to, take decisions, not necessarily control. So if anybody please try.
Response in chats.
Is there in the chat? Oh, I can't.
Questions panel. Question panel.
What is it?
In questions panel, you can see C is related party.
1 second. I can't.
And expand it and see.
No, can you put that option? I think my option has gone away. I think.
Oh, it's
Question
not available. One
Yeah,
minute, I'll
it's-
just make.
Just-
One
just
minute,
put it.
I'll make. 1 minute, it's getting updated. Now,
Yeah, A limit is open. We have an answer, Srinivas Ji. Yes. Yes, correct. Your answer is right. Please read through. So this is indirect control. So you have to just see that there will be direct control, indirect control, etc. So this AS18 is all about disclosure only. It's a disclosure standard. Remember, level 3 and level 4 are exempted from this. But from tax perspective, it is always better to disclose, because in tax audit anyway you are disclosing expenditure with the related party, and also 40A2, 40A transactions of, with the related party like partners, etc. So it's always better to disclose, not necessarily from AS point of view, but from a tax perspective. And remember, level 3, level 4 has an exemption. So if you're not following that exception, write it down saying that even though it's exempted, we are following it. So this is very basic related party slides. It's very simple, nothing major, nothing stressful. With the recent changes, only thing, the disclosures, they have given exemptions for level 3 and 4. Otherwise, there is no much change from what you learned before and what is now. Okay. So there are no queries. Now we'll move to the second half of our discussion, which is leases. This is technically a bit more complicated to understand. Leases, as you are aware, are basically two types: finance lease, and you have operating lease. Now, you have finance and you have operating lease. The accounting will change based on what is a finance and what is an operating lease. Finance lease means I am giving the machine or the car or the building or whatever I have leased to the lessee, and it is as good as the lessee's property from now on. Either he uses it over the full term of the life of the lease, or he has the option to buy back from me, like a typical truck rental, car rent, truck, you lease out a truck. In 5 years, you pay all the lease premium. After 5 years, the truck belongs to you. Largely in truck leasing, etc., these are all finance leases. There are, of course, some people who do operating leases also, but it will be very expensive. So finance lease means I'm actually giving control of my property to somebody else to use and enjoy, and later on own it. So the cardinal difference is that in finance lease, debit PPE, which was my asset, I don't have that asset anymore. Instead of PPE, I will debit a receivable, lease receivable. This PPE now will be accounted by the lessee. This is lessor. So lessee will have PPE leasehold. Lessee will claim depreciation. As if lessee will act as if he owns the asset. Only difference is that he won't show it as his own asset, he will show it as a leasehold asset. I, who is the lessor, I no longer have the asset. I will just do a simple receivable from the lessee. This is lessor accounting. Depends on whether the lease is a finance or the operating lease, the accounting changes. Now assume this is a operating lease. The lessor is just giving me something for 1 hour or 1 day or 1 year. Short-term rental, like car rental from the airport you take. This short-term rental. The ownership doesn't go, nor is the person going to use it over the life of the asset. Just short-term, maybe 5 months, 6 months, 1 year. In such a case, the PPE, the asset remains with me. I claim depreciation. Here I have a payable to the lessor, a lease payable. That's it. Like a rental, simple. So this is basically lease accounting. Depending upon whether the lease is finance or operating, the accounting will change. Now, one of the definitions which we need to study is a term is always used in this called minimum lease payments. Because whatever I am getting or I am paying as a lessor or a lessee, that comprises of the lease payments. So what are minimum lease payments? This word you will see always everywhere. So if you see this chart, minimum lease payment basically include the lease rentals, and in many leases a residual value is also attached. That is, after the lease term I'll give you this much money, like scrap value. So what, as a lessor, the amount of money I'm getting plus the scrap value I'm getting is the minimum lease payment. Now you will see that up to here, for a lessor and a lessee, the minimum lease payment means the same. That is the lease rental payable or receivable and the residual value comprised of the minimum lease payment. Now for lessor, there is one more. In many leasing, a third party will guarantee a certain residual value. Not the lessee, some other person might guarantee a residual value. So the lessor can consider that. That option is not available to lessee. Now what is excluded from both? In many lease agreement, contingent rents are there. If something like this happen, you have to pay me more or less or whatever like that. Contingency. Sometimes there is cost of services like housekeeping services, cleaning services, taxes are paid, municipal taxes are paid. I'm renting your building, so they'll say you pay building tax also, you pay for the cleaning also, etc., etc. So those are all ignored from the leasing standard. So few terms we have to remember is finance lease means I am giving the equipment literally over the life of the asset to you. I don't want it. It becomes your asset. Risk and reward transfers to you. Operating lease means pure rental. Then minimum lease payments. You have to just remember what are minimum lease payments, because that is always used across. Some examples of what is a finance lease. Transfer of ownership. is a question. I'm just trying to expand it to read it. Just one second. Can you compare finance lease? Yeah, AS and Ind AS. I'll do that. I'll do that, Sriram sir. Just now after this slide, I will do that. AS, Ind AS. Now, what is finance lease? Some examples. Ownership transfer. The lessee can buy back at the end of the term. The lessee uses the asset over the life of the asset. The rentals I'm going to get from it equals the cost of the asset. Imagine I'm leasing out a car for 1,000 rupees. And the cost of the car is also 1,000. That means I'm recovering my cost. And the last one is interesting. The leased asset is of such a specialized nature that only the lessee can use it. That is, sometimes I'll give you an equipment which you will modify for your use, like a factory, some machine. So what it means is that finance lease means once I give it to you, then it doesn't come back in the shape I gave it to you. It's yours. You will modify it, clean it, do whatever you want with it. And after you use, technically, the lease is finished. So this is examples of finance lease. Now, Sriramji had a query which I'll pick up now, so that it's very exciting query what he has asked. Basically, what he has asked is what's the difference between accounting standards leasing and Ind AS leasing. To understand this, let us look at airline industry. Indigo. Most of you must have flown Indigo Airlines. The airline companies normally don't own the airline. They just lease it. Mostly it are operating leases, wet lease. With the result, what happens? Indigo has maybe is leasing 200 aeroplanes. But if you look at Indigo's balance sheet, there will be no PPE, no aeroplane in the balance sheet because entire thing is leased. Mostly all operating leases. So the biggest airline company maybe in India has a balance sheet with no airline. That is accounting standard leasing. Because if it's an operating lease, what Indigo will show? Just debit rentals, that is pay the rentals and credit lease liability. They just create a rental liability every month for the plane they are using, they have to pay. There's no plane in the balance sheet. So when Indigo goes to a bank to take a bank loan, they will say, sorry boss, you have no asset. Now, if Indigo Airline is doing a finance lease of aeroplane, then they will have PP of aeroplane, but it will be separately disclosed as leasehold. In airline industry, finance lease of planes are almost not there. So now come to Ind AS 116. Totally change the rules of the game. Ind AS says that if you are a lessee, Ind AS 116 is applicable for lessee. For lessor, the same AS accounting is there going on. Only change is happening in lessee accounting. Lessee passes a journal entry called debit ROU asset, credit lease liability. So you see, in accounting standard, the lessee was just debiting rental expenses, while in Ind AS, for the lessee, there is only one accounting, ROU asset and lease liability. ROU asset means right of use asset. So in Ind AS, what happens? The aeroplanes come into the balance sheet of Indigo. So if Indigo is following Ind AS, they will have 200 aeroplanes. All their leasing of aeroplanes will be in their balance sheet as an ROU asset. So you see the balance sheet changes. So for aeroplane company, hotels, you see Taj Hotels or Oberoi, any hotel company, they hardly own any hotels. They are leasing. Land, the land where the hotels are situated, prime property, must be all leased from somebody, government, something like that. So when all these companies move to India, leasehold land, hotel buildings, aeroplanes, machinery, you name it, all the leasing will come into the balance sheet as an asset called ROU asset. So it's a very big difference between AS and Ind AS. Ind AS has totally changed the game. But Ind AS is only for lessee accounting. The lesser account remains the same, finance lease, operating lease. For lessee now, they can capitalize it as an asset. Simple example. You have leased an office in Chennai. In Mount Road, you have leased an office. You have taken a 5-year lease of an office where you are situated. Even though you are paying rental for 5 years, it's a lease. So that 5-year rental lease will come as ROU asset in your balance sheet as if you own that building for 5 years. ROU asset means is exactly PPE accounting. Amortization will happen. Depreciation for assets, for intangible, it is amortization. So you can amortize this cost just like you are doing PPE accounting. This is the very, very big difference between AS and Ind AS. The very big change. Hence, Ind AS 116 is extremely popular. All companies have started using it. You should also learn this thoroughly. I hope that clarification is clear, Sriramji. Now, commencement of lease. Sometimes agreement is done later. Sometimes lease starts first. All these possible complications are there. So just keep it in mind. Either it is date of lease agreement or the commitment date. Now we have another query also. The private limited company, the private company taken a lease of land for 99 years from government. Now land lease, good query has come. Under Ind AS, leasehold land is also ROU asset. Imagine, land will never get transferred to your name, even if it's 99-year lease. Under Ind AS, you can show it as ROU asset. Under the accounting standard, no, it is still leasehold because you cannot treat it as your own asset. That is a slight variance between Ind AS because land was always a conceptual problem. Because in land, you can never get it into your name. In the registrar office, even though I lease you for 1,000 years, it is still in my name. It doesn't come to you. So there was always this legal jargon associated with land. So you will observe that in most of the balance sheet, we were showing leasehold land only. But under the Ind AS, you can show it as ROU asset. Now this looks complicated, this slide, but it's not that complicated. The accounting part, this already we discussed. How do you account? For the lessor, if it's a finance lease, it's a receivable. Because this asset moves into the lessee. That's the only difference between finance lease and operating lease. So in that question again, finance lease of land is technically next to impossible in India under the AS because land will never get transferred into your name. So most people in all the accounts you will see it will be only regular lease. But in AS you can do ROU asset. Now this lesser accounting you have seen, if it's a finance lease, the lesser will show a receivable. the lease rent receivable. Now it sounds very easy, a receivable. So what is the receivable? There is a bit formula which looks a bit complicated, but it's not. The receivable is accounted as gross investment minus unearned finance income. Basically what it says, the minimum lease rentals I will get, that is the monthly rentals I will get, plus the residual value. That is the total receivable I'm going to get. From the total receivable, since this total receivable is going to be received over a period of time, you have to discount it. So you have the receivable. For example, this is a lease where I get 100 rupees every year. And in the last year, I'll get 100 rupees plus a residual value also, I'll get 110. So the minimum lease payment or the receivable in the books of the lessor is technically 310. This is the total receivable he'll get. The only difference here is that since this is coming over 3 years, you have to do present value or time value of money. You have to discount this payment. So you have to find out what is the interest rate implicit in the lease and just discount it. Now assume it's 10% interest. Do present valuation of 10%. So what gives you 310? For example, if you what you will invest at year 1 will give you 310 at year 3. Something like if you're putting in an FD, what happens? So the figure will be something like 200 here. Every year I'll get 10% return. So 200 will become 310 in maybe 3 years. I'm just giving an example. So the receivable is basically 200 rupees. The unearned income, which is basically interest cost, is the interest income for the lessor. So lessor will have rental income and also interest income because he is receiving the money over a period of time. Simple present value discounting. Up to now, I hope you are able to follow. It's very simple. Whatever receivable a lessor is supposed to get, just discount it based on the interest rate. Because he's not getting the entire money in 1 year, he's getting it over 1 or 2 years. So just discount it, the difference goes to interest income, that's all. So this is basically very simple lease rental accounting. Any queries, please put in the chat. Yeah. Now I have a query now here. Private company taking lease. Just 1 second. I'm just trying to expand this. One second. I'm just getting used to the software. I'm just trying to see how to get this question. Just 1
So
second.
you can just click on that right next to the into mark. There is option to unlock. If you click it, will open a separate window.
This one. Unlock from the train. Okay, I got it. So, but I think here the questions are not coming. That is chat, I think.
Scroll down. No, you need to unlock question where you can see. You can scroll down and see.
Now question, let me just unlock. That is this one or?
There is a questions panel, sir, right below the polls.
Yeah, I saw that. Just 1 second. Question.
And you just enable, or else you might have closed that one. You just click on view button and enable that questions again.
Yeah, just 1 second. In view, everything is enabled now. 1 second. I'll just put it again.
Yeah.
I'll click questions again. So questions have come now. How do I put it into the big one?
Yeah, that is right next to the into button. There is option to unlock.
I don't have it here. The chat it is come. Okay, that's on top. Okay, I got it. Okay, thanks, sir. Sorry, I was just trying to get used to the software. Now, there's a question now from Dinesh. The private company taken a lease of land for 19 years. Okay, that I think we already answered. Under Ind AS, Srinivas Raoji's question. Under Ind AS, can the lessee claim depreciation on ROU asset? 100%. But we don't call it depreciation, Srinivas Raoji. We call it amortization because ROU asset is an intangible asset. So just the nomenclature becomes amortization. But depreciation rate, everything will be exactly as per the PPE schedule, Ind AS 16 schedule. But we will just call it amortization. So I hope that is clear. I'll just keep this slide down. Discount rates, sometimes that is some confusion how to find a discount rate to discount. Normally the loan of your company or the leasing discount rate is generally available. If it's not available, easy ways to take the interest rate on the loans given to the company, use that as a discount rate, the easiest way to get it. I've just put a slide on how you can do the discount rate. The easy way to do it is a method called IRR, internal rate of return. If you open Microsoft Excel and just plot the cash flows, that is cash inflow and cash outflow, and you just put equal to IRR, Microsoft Excel will give you the interest rate implicit in the lease and use that rate for discounting. Now, one question I have put just to so that we can see how this interest rate discounting happens, or how do you find this interest rate. So the question is, a lessee has acquired a lease of machinery. The lease term, so he has taken a machinery for 2,35,500 and he has to pay back money every year. So what is this discount rate? Because in this case, the discount or the interest rate is not mentioned. So how do we find it? So I just worked it out for you. So it's very simple, just to have an idea of how to do discount rates. Two lakh 35,500 incoming because I got a machine free. So it is coming to me, cash inflow. And every year I have to pay 1 lakh, and the last year 1,17,000, which is shown as a negative figure. So if you in Excel, if you plot this in and out and just put equal to IRR, Excel will generate the internal rate of return for you. That is the interest rate you can use for discounting. In technical terms, IRR is the rate where the inflows and the outflows are matched. So here, if you look at it, 16% is the discount rate. So whenever there is a leasing issue, first you need to find out what is the interest rate implicit in the lease. So here it is 16%. The expensive lease. So the first entry you pass is that you have a leasehold asset coming into your books, 2,35,500 debit, and credit the lease liability. This lease liability, what you are paying, you have to pay 1 lakh, 1 lakh, and 1,17,000. These three figures. This includes principal plus interest. It's an EMI. So you need to figure out of this, how much is the 16% interest? The interest will go to P&L, principal will go to balance sheet as settlement of lease liability. The simple amortized cost schedule it is, very basic thing which you already know, but we'll just try it out. Have a look at it. This is a simple amortization schedule like our ledger account, opening balance, add interest, less payment, closing balance. So the column on the interest will go straight to P&L account. The column in the less payment will go straight to balance sheet and reduce the lease liability. So in 3 years, you will observe that the closing balance has become zero, lease liability settled. So lessee is paying interest, lessee claims depreciation, lessor gets interest income and rental income. This is very, most basic lease accounting. Now, the very complex one, this one, sale and lease back. This is very, very interesting because after the Ind AS came in, the Ind AS brought in very good clarity as to what is a sale and a lease back transaction and how do you account for sale and lease back. In our accounting standard, we never had guidance. So all these leasing companies, they were doing methods which is not clearly defined under accounting standard. They were following their own method. So Ind AS, once it came in and brought out very clear logic on how to account for sale and lease back. Now the AS 19, which is you should download AS 19, the revised ones. The revised AS 19 has got clear explanation of how to do sale and lease back transaction accounting. Very, very important. So people who have studied AS 19 in the past, obviously there was no guidance. Now there is guidance. So we'll just explain a bit technically so that you understand this thing. Sale and lease back means, imagine I am A and imagine I have a building. This building is worth 1 lakh. The cost is 1 lakh. I'm in urgent need of funds. Okay. I need 3 lakhs of funds urgently, but bank is not giving me any money. So what do I do? So I talk to some friends, then I have a friend in leasing company. So he tells me, don't worry, you sell to me for 3 lakhs. So what I will do, I will sell my building to B for 3 lakhs. So I get 3 lakhs, my problem solved because I'm in urgent need of 3 lakh funds. But my building is gone, which I don't like. So I sell to B for 3 lakhs and on the same time, I lease back my building from B. Meaning this 3 lakhs, I will pay him back over maybe 5 years. Because B is not in need of money, he is in the leasing business. So he needs interest income or lease income. So this 3 lakhs, maybe I will pay 4 lakhs to him over 5 years. The interest rate implicit here is, or because I'm paying over 4 lakhs, so he will add a bit of interest. So that's why the 3 lakh becomes 4 lakhs. This is technically called a sale and a lease back agreement. I'm selling and taking back at the same time. So here what happens? A building worth 1 lakh, I have done a sham sale for 3 lakh. That means I have a 2 lakh profit on sale, which will go straight to my P&L account. So this is where the accounting standard comes in. The accounting standard says that, see, you are selling your building and showing full profit of 2 lakhs in your P&L. But that same building you're taking back also. So you have technically not sold. So this accounting standard says, for such a transaction, this 2 lakhs, you cannot put to P&L fully, same year. You have to put it to P&L over many years, which is equal to the depreciation. For example, imagine building depreciation, I was claiming 10,000 every year. So what it says is that this profit, to the extent of depreciation, I can claim. But here the lease term is 5 years. So basically this profit also will be split up over 5 years. This 2 lakhs I cannot take as profit on year 1. I have to spread it in proportion to the depreciation on the asset as if I was using that asset. So this is the clarification Ind AS has given. Basically what it says, don't credit entire profit day 1. You're not allowed. Spread it over. the lease term in proportion to the depreciation cost. Now this is if it's a finance lease, that is I sell and I take back full responsibility. It comes back to me as a building. Risk and reward I take back, finance lease. Now there is also a possibility that I might not do a finance lease. I sold for 3 lakhs and I might just take a rental only. I just need it for 3 years rental. So that means the concept has changed. I don't own it anymore, nor am I going to be the future owner, nor am I using it for the lifetime of the asset. It's just a pure rental. In such a case, the accounting standard says something very interesting. It says that if the fair value of the building, in this case, just assume that 1 lakh is the fair value of the building. And if I'm selling it for 90,000 at a loss, so this 10,000 loss directly to P&L, no problem. If I'm selling less than fair value, full profit and loss can go to P&L. While if it is 1 lakh building, I'm selling for 1.5 lakh and I have 50,000 profit. This 50,000 over the lease term credit to P&L. This is the simple clarification given in the accounting standard for sale and lease back. When you are selling and taking back, if it's a finance lease, the profit of the sale do not take straight to P&L account, amortize it. Now, if you're leasing and taking back an asset as an operating lease, that is only for few years or for a short term, like a pure rental, risk and reward is not getting transferred. If it's a loss, take it to P&L. If it's a profit, amortize it over the lease term. I'm not sure anybody hearing, are you able to understand this logic? Please put it in chat so that I can figure out that this is being understood. Anybody listening, can you please put in chat? Are you able to follow or just see, because the sale and lease back is generally not understood very clearly. It's generally not very clearly understood because initially we did not have much clarity on this subject. Now we have got clarity. So my suggestion is that if any of you feel that you understood, please put in chat so that I know that you are following what I'm talking. Because we have reached almost our end of our thing. In the PPT, I put some clarifications for sale and lease back. This is picked up straight from the accounting standard, so that you can do it at your level. You can just do it later on, but conceptually, as long as you have understood this, matter is clear. Now, some of the disclosures for operating lease. Basically, everybody wants to know in the disclosure is how much lease payments are due for how many number of years, 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, whatever is due, that is what you have to put it. Yeah, now some questions have come in. By the time you look at the disclosure, I will answer some of the questions. Now, Sriramji's question, in land lease only the right to use is transferred and the ownership is retained by the lessor. Is the right to use a commodity for pledging and raising funds? That will depend on the bank. Normally, without that original owner's NOC or something, it will be not possible. And most original owners will never allow. No original owner will ever allow a land. If oh, you're having a screen freeze, are you able to? I hope you're. I got a comment that screen is frozen. Okay, I think that must be old comment. So technically land, if I'm the owner of a land, I'll never allow you to pledge. That's the reality of this thing. Nobody will allow land to be pledged, especially in today's time. So that is your answer. Yeah, IT department accepts it because it's accounting standard. But you must understand that, Srinivasaji, the income tax returns are not filed as per AS. When you file income tax returns, you have to follow ICDS, Income Computation and Disclosure Standards. Largely, our AS is in compliance with ICDS, largely, because it's cost based. Now, if you are in Ind AS, you have a problem because Ind AS is fair value based. So, all the leasing entries of ROU asset, etc., the IT department don't agree. You have to go back to regular old simple cost based accounting. Now, for sale and lease back, the accounting standard, you have to check with the ICDS and see under the income tax what is allowed or not allowed. The income tax will have a different connotation because that will be more favorable to revenue. Yeah, salvage value of Sriramji, 17,000 is taken because as we discussed, it is the cost which is guaranteed. If you see the minimum lease payment slide, I'll just show you the slide. See this, Sriramji. Lease rental plus residual value you have to take to arrive at MLP, minimum lease payment. And then for your query, you should also read this here. Here the lessee has guaranteed a residual value of 17,000. The lessor estimates 3,500. So if you see this example here, for lessee accounting, only what is guaranteed by lessee has to be taken for minimum lease payment. What is guaranteed by somebody else, third party, need not be taken. So here in your question, 3,500 is guaranteed by lessor or some third party, while lessee has agreed for 17,000. So you take 17,000, you don't take somebody else's guarantee. I hope that query is clear. So we come to the fag end of our discussion. Operating lease, for finance lease, some basic disclosures are again minimum lease payments, present value of minimum lease payments. Present value means the discounted value using the internal rate of return. So these are basically minor disclosures. Now, because we are non-company, we have level 2, 3, 4 exemptions from disclosure. A lot of exemptions from disclosures are there in the leasing standards. So basically, as long as you can put this minimum lease payment, you don't need to do anything else. So for finance lease by lessee, there are so many disclosures, exemptions you can read through at a later stage. Basically what it says, you don't need to do so much of reconciliations, present value, future value and all. You don't need to write too much about the leasing, just show basic things. In the previous slide, you observed that minimum lease payment and present value of minimum lease payment was mentioned. This kind of chart. Now here it says these kind of reconciliations are not needed for level 2, 3 and 4. So some minor exemptions are there for lessee, and also that is for finance lease and operating lease for lessee, some exceptions are there. And for lessor, there are again a lot of, basically in leasing, you are supposed to show a reconciliation of present value, minimum lease payment, number of years more, how much lease is there, all those things you can just ignore. For level 4, which is less than 10 crore, almost no disclosures, almost zero. Now some more questions have come. Non-entity, same thing, Sri Ramji. The difference for, now we are discussing non-entities. For small and medium company also almost similar kind. I already also put it into the slide. I'll just show you now. The exemptions for SME and also for companies, what are the exemptions? It's already in the PPT in the beginning. Basically, just remember, if you are up to 250 crores, almost you have a huge amount of exemption in disclosing a lot of things. If you're doing lease, my suggestion, just do some very basic things. Try and give, even though it's exempted, lease payments due in 1 year, 1 to 2 years, because that's an interesting information. Otherwise, there's hardly anything to give. The disclosures are in the accounts, leasehold, asset, depreciation, interest income, etc. Or anyway, that's in the financials. So here you are seeing level 2, 3, 4 exceptions for lessor. And this is the other one. There's a question from Shashidhara. In case of operating lease, the asset is transferred to lessor. Hence, why amortize the profit? Yes. Shashidhara, for sale and lease back, for an operating lease, meaning I sold my building to you and I got money immediately. It solved my cash problem. So my asset is gone, I have nothing. The asset is now yours, risk and reward is yours, depreciation is yours. Now that building I am leasing back from you for my office use for just 2 years. The building has a life of another 50 years. I am just using it from you for 2 years. It's like a simple rental. So what they say is that it is almost like a commercial transaction. So technically, the profit on sale of asset to you is largely correct. So if it is a loss, it says take it to P&L. If it is a profit, they say that profit amortize it over the lease term. If the lease is for 2 years and I have 50,000 profit, 25,000 each year I will book. Because I don't own the asset and nothing. I'm just selling it to you and taking it back for 2 years. So the accounting standard says profit also you shift it over 2 years. It's actually pretty logical. If the lease was for 5 years, I will split it over 5 years. But if it is a finance lease, basically I sell you the building and I'm taking back the building for the entire life back. That is, I'm still the owner technically. There it says amortize it just like it is depreciated, because there the lease term is infinite. The building might be for 50 years or 100 years. So as per PPE schedule, if the depreciation is for 60 years, this also I will spread it over 60 years because it is as good as my building. So small profits will come every year to the account, which is actually logical. I hope that is understood. Sriramji's question, Sriramji, yeah, it's not a catch question, Sriramji. If it is a lessor accounting, here now we are accounting as a lessee. If it's a lessor accounting, then it will make sense. Because lessor will only take 3,500 because that is what is guaranteed by a third party. He did not take the lessee's this thing, because the lessor feels that I'll only get 3.5. So from lessor's perspective, the minimum lease payment is a different figure. From lessee's perspective, the minimum lease payment can be a different figure. It all depends upon the residual value or scrap value. Yeah, capital profit. Sriramji, sale and lease back is 100% capital profit. And why it is, yeah, you can call it why it is amortized, because I am selling you the asset and I am taking back the asset. So I did not sell you in the first instance, technically speaking. You understand? So it's like saying that, for example, so what the accounting standard is saying, if you book entire profit in year one, you are actually fooling, because the asset is still yours only. So people can keep on doing sale and lease back and start inflating their assets and liabilities on a regular basis. Once this AS, now this concept has come, the sale and lease back now you see will be very organized. Only real players will be there. Because if I lease back, profit is split over the lease term. Loss is booked immediately for operating lease. Actually, according to me, it's illogical. In the past, there was no, we did not have a guidance. So it was a confusion how to account for this. So people had creative accounting. Now they have put the accounting very clearly correct in sale and lease back. So this is our two basic things, AS 18 and AS 19. We still have a bit more time. So we have one session on Saturday where we are going to do a bit of derivative accounting, which is pretty interesting. And so what I was thinking is that maybe 5 minutes, I will just take up a bit of derivatives just to plan some thoughts in your mind. So you can also read a bit on this, because if you have to understand the AS11, etc., derivatives are important. And derivative is something we never learned, because AS 30, 31, 32 was never there. In India, it is super strong on derivatives. So a lot of CAs in India are today sweating it out because we are not trained in derivative accounting and we miss out a lot of things. So Saturday I propose to spend a bit of time on derivative accounting in AS11. So to allude to that, 5 minutes today, I just want to give a basic concept. So if it's okay, I will just spend 5 minutes.
Yes, sir.
And
Please,
then we
please.
can, okay, if it's okay for the listeners. Now there is one more question. Would it differ if I take operating lease is my sister company name? Yeah, see, sister company name is you will come under related party. But naturally, the tax authority is going to bounce back on you saying that this is some kind of creative transaction. So as long as you can prove that it's a genuine finance lease or an operating lease, nothing wrong with it. Panchajanyam's question, what is the difference in computation of profit as per AS and ICDS? ICDS we will take up separate in a session, because we'll have to go through the ICDS very few actually. We will take it up maybe another time, because then I have to start with the tax base and start from zero. ICDS basically is cost-based accounting. Largely, it tallies with our accounting standard. Now, for sale and lease back, technically speaking, there is no clear guidance. Technically speaking, the tax department obviously wants money, so they might not allow the amortization. But the losses they might catch. So it's a bit tricky there. Because when you sell, it's a sale. So profit on sale, capital gains are coming in. Now, you do not account how much profits you will show in your ITR. Are you going to show entire profits, or are you going to show amortized profit? Amortization accounting standard. It's got nothing to do with ICDS. It's a bit tricky area, so I don't want to start halfway. So just put a thought on this. When you just flip through the ICDS, slowly you'll get a grip on the thing of whether they allow. Now, normally tax department do not allow amortization of profit. They don't allow. They go by simple sale, finished. You pay the tax, they'll say capital gains. And leasing is a different story. The ROU asset leasing of Ind AS, they don't agree. So those amortization and all will be disallowed by income tax. So when you do Ind AS, what happens is that you have to reverse all the entries of Ind AS 116 leasing because the tax department don't recognize it. And you have to follow simple cost based accounting, same like operating lease, finance lease, no, the same concept goes on. Because they have issue. How can in the Ind AS both parties are claiming depreciation? So income tax has an issue there. How can both parties claim depreciation on same asset? Only one person can do it. Okay, so I hope some logic I have put in. Just 2 minutes we'll spend on this one, derivative and this thing. This is just so that you have a base for Saturday and we have anyway time. So just give me 5 minutes. I won't take more than that.
Yes.
Okay. Now, if you look at it, one of the big things we missed out in life is learning derivatives. Derivative means something which is moving with an index, like Bombay Stock Exchange, BSE index. So those who are in shares know that Sensex is going up means all are happy, our value is going up. Sensex is going down, we are all unhappy. So derivative means something which changes with an index. There is no actual cash flow, there is no buy or sale happening. It is just in your mind you are happy. Ah, Sensex is going up, I am happy. I did not sell, I did not buy. Unrealized profit I am having. So the cardinal rule now for derivative accounting, this is where most of the frauds happened. In America in 2008, the financial crash happened all because of misuse of derivative accounting. So what happened? The group of 20 nations got together and they said derivative accounting has to be fixed. So the International Accounting Standard 39 has been fixed. IFRS 9 came into the picture from 2018. We had a problem because our AS, we don't have financial instruments in the AS. So in India, we have a massive problem. So now what has happened is that the ICA has brought on guidance note on derivatives. Even though we don't have accounting standard, we have guidance note. Now this guidance note is now a replica of the Ind AS or the IFRS. So it's very important that you understand that. So what it says is that all derivatives must be charged to profit and loss account, meaning mark to market closing rates should go to P&L account. What are derivatives? 4 types: forwards, option, swap, and future. Only these are derivatives. Forward contract you have heard, foreign exchange contract, etc. Now options and futures are dealt with through a stock exchange, regulated. Those of you are dealing in options and futures know that it's a very tricky gambling business. Margin money has to be put, etc. Now forwards and swaps are normally issued by banks or financial institutions. Over the counter you can buy it. So what the cardinal rule now in AS and Ind AS is that moment you see the word forwards, options, swaps or futures, make sure that you do mark to market accounting every closing, every quarter closing, year closing, month closing. Whatever is the mark to market rate, debit or credit P&L. This is the fundamental rule of derivative accounting. So remember that. The trick is you have to try to find out forwards, options, swaps and futures. Now in financing agreements, there are buyback agreements. All kinds of financing agreements have a buyback option, sellout option, call option, put options, basically in financing. So you have to make sure that you read through agreements, and if you see any kind of call, put, etc. option, bring it out and see what is the impact of it. Unlike in the past, we did not know what to do. Some of us would just disclose in the notes. Some people will put a provision in the accounts. Some people don't do both. So here, make sure you disclose in the notes and also debit P&L account. So when you debit P&L account, what happens? Your profit starts going up and down, volatility. And these are all unrealized gains. Because the Sensex is going up and down, your P&L is going up and down. It makes no sense. You did not buy or sell anything. So as a CFO, you have a problem. Because your profits are just going up and down. Our accounting standard 13 says two things. Short-term investments, mark to market. Long-term investments, you have to just disclose in the notes only. No M2M. Okay. Keep that in mind when you are learning derivative. Now imagine you have taken a forward contract for paying some foreign loans or something. You have a problem in hand because the rates keep on changing. Even though nothing happened, your profit and loss account is getting hit with the exchange rate difference. In the form of an example, I will tell you. On 1st April 2021, I have raised a purchase order for buying a laptop for US dollar 10,000. On 1st October 2021, laptop is received. On 1st April 2022, 1 year later, I make the payment. When I raised the purchase order, US dollar was 71 rupees. The day laptop was received, the US dollar was 73. And this April, when I'm making payment, US dollar was 77. So the period from up to the date of receiving laptop, the accounting standard guidance note gives us an option. They say you may follow a thing called hedge accounting. Since all derivatives are mark to market, your profit and loss goes up and down. So as a CFO, you have a problem. So the AS guidance note gives you an option. You may follow hedge accounting. You may, it's not compulsory. That is, if you don't want to debit and credit your P&L with unrealized gains and losses, because here up to 1st October, nothing has happened. I have taken a forward contract on 1st April. That's all I have done to protect my US dollars for payment date in April. That's the only thing I have done. I have entered into a derivative contract on day one on raising purchase order. I've taken a forward contract for $10,000. 77 rupees the rate given by the bank. That's the only thing I have done. So up to October, nothing happened. But up to October, every month ending, the US dollar Indian rupee is changing. So that exchange difference, I have to keep on debiting to P&L, debit or credit. So my P&L was going up and down based on what is the exchange rate. So the guidance note says you may use hedge accounting, meaning up to here, this difference, you can directly debit retained earnings or reserves and surplus. No need to take it to P&L. So for the first 6 months, my P&L is protected by hedge accounting, and this is popularly called a cash flow hedge. Meaning, cash flow hedges protect the variability of transactions. If there is a forward contract I have taken, it's a variability. I'm protecting by taking a forward contract. So up to the date the laptop has come, it is called cash flow hedge. And cash flow hedge, I can directly debit reserves and surplus, the unrealized gains and losses. On the day the laptop has come, I have a journal entry, debit laptop, credit supplier. On the day a debit and a credit is recognized in the balance sheet, this cash flow hedge becomes a fair value hedge. Meaning from this date, all exchange fluctuation you have to debit P&L. And up to now, whatever you put in reserves and surplus also gets transferred to P&L. So hedge accounting allows us to protect the P&L for 6 months. So this is a tool for the CFOs, etc. This concept is what we will discuss a bit on Saturday in AS 11 guidance note. Very, very important that derivative accounting and hedge accounting is made clear to everybody, because this is an area where in India all of us are in bad week because we never studied during OSTA. We don't have AS 30, 31, 32 in India for financial instruments. The IFRS is super strong on this. So please remember, all derivatives are P&L account, mark to market. If you don't want to do mark to market accounting, you may use hedge accounting. Cash flow hedges you can put to reserves and surplus temporarily. Moment it become a fair value hedge, move it to P&L. So this is a basic concept I wanted to just discuss so that on Saturday we have a very better understanding. So unless you have any more queries, we can stop.
Just to,
There is
not much queries, sir.
there's nothing, no.
We have,
So
we have taken up all the queries.
Yeah.
it seems. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for the time spent here, sir, on accounting.
Thank you very much.
Activities. Thank you on behalf of the chairman, secretary in their absence here for your time spent here, sir. We look forward to your session on Saturdays.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.